Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Thursday, August 15th, 2024. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. In Israel, support for war in Lebanon grows. So the Wall Street Journal reported on Wednesday that there is growing support among Israeli officials to launch an offensive in Lebanon against Hezbollah. And this report comes as Israel is anticipating a major response from Hezbollah to the assassination of Fuad Shukr, a high-level Hezbollah military commander who was killed by an Israeli airstrike in Beirut on July 30th. Hours later, Ismail Haniyeh, the Hamas political leader, was killed in Tehran in an Israeli assassination. So on top of awaiting the response from Iran, Israel is also expecting a big response from Hezbollah. It's possible that it could come together. Still haven't seen anything yet. And, we have seen, as we've been covering, that Israel and Hezbollah continue to trade fire across the Israel-Lebanon border. But Hezbollah has not escalated things beyond the rocket and drone attacks that it has been launching into northern Israel since October 2023. So current and former Israeli officials told the Wall Street Journal that an escalation from Hezbollah could be the pretext for Israel to launch a full-blown war in Lebanon. One senior Israeli official said that a major Hezbollah attack could, quote, lead to an Israeli attack that will lead to a new reality on the northern border, end quote. Some members of Netanyahu's coalition government want a ceasefire in Gaza, which would cool tensions in the north. Hezbollah has said that it would stop its attacks on Israel if there was a ceasefire in Gaza, although they did say that before the attack in Beirut. So it's not clear if that would take their response off the table. Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, has vowed that they will escalate in response to the assassination. But again, we don't know if, say, there was a ceasefire in Gaza, would Hezbollah stop again? Maybe. But so there is some elements of the Israeli government that want a ceasefire and want to cool tensions in the north. But there's also officials who want ceasefire in Gaza and to start a war, to escalate in Lebanon when there's a ceasefire. There's also some, it seems like, that don't want a ceasefire in Gaza and also want war in Lebanon. That's certainly what Ben-Gvir and Smotrich and people like that want. This report also said that the leadership of Israel's Northern Command, the military leadership of the Northern Command, is also itching for an escalation against Hezbollah. So I think it's important here, this point that they're saying, if Hezbollah, retaliates for what we did in Beirut, that'll give us, the pretext. That means we can really go after them, launch an offensive into Lebanon. And Hezbollah, I'm sure, is aware of that if they do something really big, then Israel might use it to launch like a really major war in southern Lebanon. So that's all factored into their calculations. So one reason why a lot of Israeli officials think that the time is ripe for an escalation is the strong support that the U.S. has shown Israel in the wake of Shukr's killing in Beirut and the assassination of Haniyeh. The U.S., there's all these reports, all these comments from U.S. officials saying, we're doing everything we can, we're working around the clock to make sure there's no war in Lebanon. But what are they also doing? They've sent all this firepower to the Middle East to say, and they're vowing to defend Israel from any big attack from Iran, from Hezbollah. They also just approved a new $20 billion weapon sale, all sorts of things, including F-15s, tank ammunition. And actually, U.S. officials or Israeli officials told Axios that one reason why the Biden administration went ahead and approved all those arms deals was to send a message to Iran and Hezbollah. So again, purposely showing very strong support for Israel against Iran and Hezbollah. So doesn't seem to me like they're doing everything that they can to avoid a war. of course, this has just emboldened Israel. You see it from what these Israeli officials are saying that, we're getting all this support for the U.S. They're showing us that they really have our back. So let's launch this war already. All right, so the next one here, Israeli airstrike wounds at least 10 in southern Lebanon town. So this one is from Jason Ditz. On Wednesday, Israel carried out an airstrike against the southern Lebanese town of Al-Abbasiyah, targeting a motorcycle and 2 cars. According to the Lebanese health ministry, the strike wounded at least 10 people. So again, the Israeli airstrikes in Lebanon continue. Though Israeli airstrikes typically target Hezbollah members or infrastructure, there is no word that today's attack hit Hezbollah. The health ministry says that the wounded were transferred to local hospitals. Israel usually claims that everything that they target is Hezbollah, but no confirmation in this attack from the Lebanese side on that. And so Amos Hochstein, who is the U.S.'s special envoy for Lebanon, was in Beirut on Wednesday when these attacks took place to discuss a plan to prevent war in Lebanon. He said that he still believes that war can be avoided. I don't think he's the best envoy for the U.S. to be sending on this mission. He was born in Israel. He served in the IDF. He's an American citizen now, and apparently he doesn't have dual citizenship anymore. But he was in the IDF. It's just not the best person, to when you're trying to act like you're a neutral mediator here. But anyway, so we will see. And the deal that like the U.S. and France have been kind of pushing is to get Hezbollah to withdraw from the border back beyond the Litani River. I think one thing being discussed is sending in the regular Lebanese army to fill that gap there. But it doesn't seem like anybody's really confident that a deal is going to be reached here. All right, so the next one here, Hamas reaffirms that it wants the Biden ceasefire deal. So on Wednesday, Hamas reiterated that it wants to implement a ceasefire proposal that was unveiled by President Biden in May instead of restarting hostage deal talks with Israel. So this is a Hamas Politburo member, Suhail al-Hindi. He told Al-Arabi al-Jadid, quote, "The movement demands a clear commitment by the Israeli occupation to what was agreed upon on July 2nd, according to the clarifications conveyed by the mediators. And if that happens, the movement is ready to enter into the mechanisms for implementing the agreement," end quote. Al-Hindi also said Hamas would not participate in hostage deal talks that are set to be held in Doha on Thursday, since Hamas thinks Israel will use them as cover to continue the genocidal war in Gaza. So they are saying that they're not going to participate in these talks. This is in Doha. The U.S. is sending Burns, the CIA director, Qatari and Egyptian officials are going to be involved. Israel sending negotiators. Hamas is saying that they're not going to take part, but an Arab official said that Hamas is still willing to hold talks with the mediators right after they hold the talks with Israel. So it sounds like at least there's gonna be some messages relayed, and there are Hamas officials based in Qatar. An Arab official told the Times of Israel that the format will be effectively the same as previous rounds of negotiations because Hamas and Israel haven't been negotiating directly. They're not in the same room. You have the mediators going back and forth. So there is a chance that some negotiating between Israel and Hamas might happen, but also not exactly clear if anything's going to get accomplished. But it's interesting, Biden brought out this big ceasefire plan back in May, said it was an Israeli proposal, and here you have Hamas saying, okay, yeah, let's do that. Let's do that now. We'll see how it goes. All right, so the next one here, Trump speaks to Netanyahu about the Gaza hostage ceasefire deal. This article's from Axios. So former President Donald Trump spoke on the phone with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Wednesday and discussed the Gaza hostage and ceasefire deal, according to two U.S. sources who were briefed on the call. A crucial round of negotiations with senior U.S., Qatari, Egyptian, and Israeli officials is set to take place in Doha on Thursday. So just some background on the talks. So one source, this is kind of interesting. One source said that Trump's call was intended to encourage Netanyahu to take the deal, but stressed he did not know if this is indeed what the former president told Netanyahu. So according to this source, that was the idea of the call, was to tell him to take the deal, but they don't know for sure if that's what Trump said. One reason I think Trump might not do that is that I think a deal could help. If there was a ceasefire deal right now, I think it could help Kamala. But then there is also, maybe Trump could take credit for it if there is a deal. So the Israeli Prime Minister's office did not deny that the call took place, and the Trump campaign declined to comment. All right. So the next story here, the U.S. is not discussing withdrawing from Iraq. So this is not good news. The State Department on Wednesday said that at no point in recent talks with the Iraqi government has the U.S. discussed the idea of withdrawing troops from Iraq. The comments came in response to questions about reports saying the U.S. was planning to withdraw. There was a report from Tasnim, which is an Iranian news agency, that said, this was earlier this week, and it said that the U.S. and Iraq would announce plans for a withdrawal next month. So that was a report in an Iranian news agency citing sources in Iraq, but does not sound like that's what's happening. And I was a little skeptical of the report when I first saw it. It was kind of short on detail. And I think there's a chance that, the Iraqi government is trying to kind of placate the Iran-aligned, Shia political factions and the militias, because they want the U.S. to leave. So I think, they might be saying that they're getting a better deal than they're actually going to get. So State Department spokesman Vedant Patel said that the talks with the Iraqi government had been focused on transitioning U.S. involvement in Iraq from an international coalition to a bilateral security partnership, which would mean an open-ended U.S. military presence. So this is what he said, quote, "At no point did we discuss the withdrawal of U.S. forces from Iraq, but we continued to discuss the transition to what we would say a bilateral security partnership," end quote. So the thing is that they already kind of did this. I think this was back in Trump or maybe the first year of Biden. So there's all these elements in Iraq that want the U.S. to leave. The U.S. refuses to leave. So what they did was, they made this big announcement. Oh, in 2021, we're going to change the mission from a combat mission to an advisory role. But they made a big show of it, but they didn't pull any troops out, and nothing really changed. I mean, the U.S. is still there essentially in the same role. So there's currently about 2,500 U.S. troops in Iraq as part of the U.S.-led anti-ISIS coalition known as Operation Inherent Resolve. So what the U.S. is saying, and this is kind of what I figured out just looking at the statements after the U.S. and Iraq hold talks on the future of the U.S. military presence, is that they're going to kind of just rename what the U.S. does in Iraq, not part of this coalition, but a bilateral security partnership. So it did seem like al-Sudani, the prime minister, really wanted the U.S. to leave. He began calling for it earlier this year for all foreign troops to withdraw from the coalition. And that was in response to the U.S. bombing the PMF, which is the part of the Iraqi security forces. Al-Sudani has said that Iraqi troops could handle ISIS remnants without the foreign coalition. So if the U.S. isn't helping them fight ISIS, then what, obviously we know why they want to stay there. They want to stay in Iraq for a few reasons, namely to, kind of counter Iran's influence in the country, but also to support the U.S. occupation of Syria. They need those bases in Iraq to support the occupation of Syria. But so if they're not fighting ISIS, helping fight ISIS, then what are they doing? Again, like officially on paper, what are they doing? We know what they're doing, but they're not going to call it the anti-Iran coalition. But anyway, so what's concerning about this is that we just saw recently the rocket and drone attacks restart against U.S. bases in Iraq and Syria. And I think that is a response to the lack of progress on a U.S. withdrawal, because back in February, when the Iraqi government and Iran got the militias to stop attacking the U.S., I don't know for sure, but I suspect that they said, we're going to get, that the Iraqi government said, we're going to work on a withdrawal. We're going to get the U.S. to leave. They've told them that before, years ago, and it never happened. So I think these rocket attacks restarted. They actually did restart after the U.S. and Iraq held talks, and nothing really came out of them. So this comment from the U.S. saying, oh, we never even discussed it. I mean, the way he put it, he said, at no point did we discuss a withdrawal. I think this is going to really anger some people in Iraq and possibly provoke more attacks. And one reason why, the parliament voted to expel the U.S. in 2020 after the U.S. killed Soleimani in Baghdad. One reason why that the U.S. hasn't left and has been able to stay is the fact that they have enormous economic leverage over the government. Since the 2003 invasion, Iraqi foreign reserves have been held by the U.S. Federal Reserve. That gives the U.S. basically control of the Iraqi currency. They can destroy it. They can devalue it if they want. And that's just one way that they really have control over the Iraqi economy. The U.S. also keeps tight control of their ability to pay Iran for electric and things like that. Every once in a while you'll see a story, the U.S. Authorizes a sanctions waiver so Iraq can pay Iran like a few billion for electricity. And then you'll see the Iran hawk say, Biden's giving them another, however much it is. But that's literally the U.S. just allowing Iraq to pay its electric bill. That always just gets totally misrepresented, but just goes to show the tight control the U.S. has over the Iraqi economy. And it's something, I forget where I read it a few months back. It was like Iraqi sources speaking to some media outlet, basically saying they know they can't kick the U.S. out. They're not going to be able to get them out for these economic reasons. So they're essentially holding the country hostage. All right. So the next one here, the U.S. is in constant contact with Ukraine on Kursk. So President Biden said on Tuesday that he was in constant contact with the Ukrainians about the invasion of Russia's Kursk Oblast, signaling deep U.S. involvement in the invasion of Russia. Biden told reporters, quote, I've spoken with my staff on a regular basis, probably every 4 or 5 hours for the last 6 or 8 days. And it's creating a real dilemma for Putin. And we've been in direct contact, constant contact with the Ukrainians, end quote. So, again, this sounds like very deep U.S. involvement in this offensive. Now, what's interesting here is we have an old president, his brain's not doing too well. He's not running again because of that. And this is the commander-in-chief while we're closer to direct war with Russia than ever before. And he made these comments. So he made these comments after landing in Louisiana aboard Air Force One. He got off the plane and spoke with reporters. But right before he got on the plane, reporters also asked him about Kursk, and he said that he's not going to comment on it publicly. He said, I'd rather not comment on that publicly, when basically asked the same question. So then he gets on a plane, a couple hours to Louisiana, gets off the plane, and he's like, oh, yeah, we're really involved in this whole thing, is essentially what he said. So the line from the White House is that they did not know Ukraine was preparing this offensive, which I find hard to believe. I think there's certainly are things Ukraine does that it doesn't tell the U.S. about when it comes to, specific drone attacks in Russia and things like that. But I find it hard to believe that they had no idea they were planning this big offensive. I mean, wouldn't they see, kind of the movement of Ukrainian troops up there? But anyway, this is just goes to show in the View, what we're seeing from Russia, the rhetoric from Russia, from Putin, is that they're saying, this is a Western invade. The way Putin put it, he said that the West is waging war against Russia using Ukrainians. And then you have the president saying something like this. So very provocative. All right, so the next one here, Germany issues an arrest warrant for the Nord Stream bombing. So German prosecutors have issued an arrest warrant for a Ukrainian man they believe was involved in the sabotage of the Nord Stream natural gas pipelines, which connect Russia and Germany. So the man, who was identified by the media as 44-year-old Volodymyr Zuravlov, is a professional diver who was last seen in Poland, but Polish prosecutors have said the suspect has already left the country, making it unclear if he will actually be arrested. The Nord Stream pipelines were bombed in September 2022. At the time, if you remember, there were many Western journalists. I shouldn't say journalists. Maybe I should just say pundits. I'm sure that there were journalists as well. There definitely were. But yeah, in my mind, I'm thinking more kind of the pundits on cable news blaming this on Russia, even though it never made any sense that Russia bombed the pipelines because they are Russia's pipelines. And then in 2023, we had the big report from Seymour Hersh, and his report alleged that President Biden ordered the bombing of the pipelines. The story goes that U.S. Navy divers planted explosives on them in July 2022 during NATO drills in the Baltic Sea, and then a Norwegian spy plane detonated the explosives a few months later in September. So Hersh had his sources, and then also kind of the evidence, the circumstantial evidence that the showing that the U.S. had a motive for the attack. Before Russia invaded, you had President Biden and Victoria Nuland basically say, if Russia goes ahead with the invasion, we're going to take care of the Nord Stream pipeline. And then you also had Antony Blinken, after the pipeline was destroyed, saying it was a tremendous opportunity to get the Europeans off Russian gas. And we've seen U.S. LNG exports to Europe increase. So you could say the U.S. had the motive. At the same time, what else was I going to say? Oh, and also for years, the U.S. was trying to kill Nord Stream 2 with sanctions, but that didn't work. So at the same time, Hersh's report has not been confirmed by other sources. And then we saw all these reports in, the Washington Post, from the mainstream news outlets citing, Western and U.S. officials pointing the finger at Ukraine, saying that this thing goes back to Ukraine, and that the leading theory is that a small number of Ukrainians rented a sailboat in Poland from where they carried out the attack. It's a sailboat, pretty small yacht. Hard to believe that they could carry all these explosives on it, but that's kind of the story that we get. Either way, it's certainly not Russia doing it. It's either way, it was the U.S. or it was Ukraine. And if it was Ukraine, the CIA or something was probably involved, I'm sure, in some way. But anyway, so we'll see what happens with this arrest warrant if anybody actually gets arrested. It's like an EU-wide arrest warrant. I have a feeling the guy's probably back in Ukraine. All right, so the next one here. Israel approves new settlement on UNESCO site. So this article is from the New Arab. So Israel has approved a new settlement on a UNESCO World Heritage Site near Bethlehem in the occupied West Bank, its far-right finance minister said on Wednesday. Bezalel Smotrich, who also heads civil affairs at the Defense Ministry, said that his office has completed work and published a plan for these new settlements. And this is just south of Jerusalem, again, near Bethlehem. All of Israel's settlements in the West Bank, occupied since 1967, are considered illegal under international law, regardless of whether they have Israeli planning permission. Smotrich, who is a settler himself, and this position that he has in the Defense Ministry gives him this power to approve settlements, expand settlements, and he's on the record for years saying that Israel should annex the whole territory, push the Palestinians out. He said, quote, "No anti-Israeli and anti-Zionist decision will stop the development of settlements. We will continue to fight against the dangerous project of creating a Palestinian state by creating facts on the ground," end quote. The Israeli anti-settlement group Peace Now denounced the plan, calling it a wholesale attack on an area renowned for its ancient terraces and sophisticated irrigation systems, evidence of thousands of years of human activity. But the Israelis have their eyes on it. So more settlement expansion. All right, so the next story here, the U.S. military's sexual assault crisis as a cost of war. So this is a report from Brown University's Cost of War project, and they've put out a lot of really thorough reports on the cost of war, the cost of the terror wars, basically, both the financial cost, the human cost, how many people have been killed in these wars, how many people have been displaced, and how much it costs. And so this is from the same people, about the U.S. military's sexual assault crisis. And this is just a summary of it on their website, and it links to the full paper, but just some of the statistics that they have here. In 2023, the Pentagon estimated that there were 29,000 sexual assault incidents in the military, or reported sexual assault incidents in the military. Independent data shows that the number is much higher, 73,694. Really, since 9/11, on average, 24% of women experienced sexual assault in the military. 1.9% of men said that they experienced it. And there's also a number from Afghanistan. So on average, over the course of the war in Afghanistan, 24%. Oh, so this is the number for Afghanistan. 24% of active duty women and 1.9% of active duty men experienced sexual assault. So 24% is a pretty high number. So if you want more detail on that, they have their paper there. All right, so the last story here, documents show that Hunter Biden sought State Department help for Burisma. This article is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. Newly released documents show that Hunter Biden sought to inappropriately benefit the Ukrainian energy company Burisma while his father was vice president. The records were suppressed by the White House. The files obtained by the New York Times and reported on Tuesday show Hunter sent a letter to the U.S. ambassador in Italy in 2016 requesting assistance for Burisma. At the time, Hunter was making tens of thousands of dollars per month as a board member of the Ukrainian energy company, a position he was handed in 2014, a position he was given after the U.S. helped overthrow the Yanukovych government. And again, Biden was the vice president, and he was very involved in that, made a lot of visits to Ukraine in the aftermath, spoke to the new parliament, and his son just happened to get a job, and he didn't have any energy experience or anything like that. So just really blatant, obvious corruption. The diplomatic staff in Italy felt the request was not appropriate. A U.S. official based at the embassy in Rome wrote, quote, "I want to be careful about promising too much. This is a Ukrainian company, and purely to protect ourselves, the U.S. government should not be actively advocating with the government of Italy without the company going through the Department of Commerce Advocacy Center." End quote. I guess they wanted some business in Italy, so they're asking. So he goes straight to the U.S. embassy in Italy. It's amazing. While the Times received records from the State Department, the outlet was not provided with the full text of the letter. The paper suggested the State Department may have more records related to Hunter Biden that it is withholding, also noting the documents it obtained were only released after President Biden dropped his re-election bid. There's always been questions around Burisma. As Joe Biden campaigned for the White House in 2020, questions arose about his son's ties to Burisma, a major gas firm founded by Ukrainian oligarch and ex-environment minister Mikhailo Slozhetsky. At the time, Hunter sat on the company's board and raked in between $50,000 and $83,000 each month, despite having no prior experience in the energy sector or in Ukraine more broadly. Then VP under the Obama administration, the elder Biden was directing U.S. policy in Ukraine. When Hunter got the job, the country was in a state of instability and civil war following a U.S.-backed coup in 2014. The Biden campaign and the White House have attempted to dismiss charges that Hunter acted inappropriately and exploited his father's political influence, deeming the claims Russian disinformation. And of course, there was a big laptop story in 2020 that all these former intelligence officials claimed was Russian disinformation or whatever. So that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our viewpoints. One from Megan Russell. The U.S. is preparing for an unwinnable war against China. I think that's very important. I need to be covering that stuff more with China. One from Judge Napolitano. The FBI visits Scott Ritter about the FBI raid on Scott Ritter's house. One from Andy Corbley. Russia's parliamentary left calls for assassination of Zelensky and his cabinet, which is very interesting. Left-wing parties in the Russian parliament calling to take out the leadership in Kiev. And the point of the article is that this goes to show that the opposition, the pressure on Putin from his opposition is they want him to go harder in Ukraine. One from Mark Episcopus, what the Ukraine war has in common with Vietnam. And one from Matt Taibbi, did Robert Mueller rely on Clinton campaign operatives to point to Russia? So please go check all of that out. Check out our blog. We repost the Ron Paul Liberty Report in there, Kyle Anzalone's great show, Conflicts of Interest, some other articles in there. One thing, speaking of the Ron Paul Liberty Report, I want to mention again the Ron Paul Institute's conference that will be taking place on Saturday, August 31st in Washington, D.C. at the Washington Dulles Airport. Some great speakers, especially if you're interested in foreign policy. Dan McAdams, Ron Paul, John Mearsheimer, Judge Knapp. It should be a really cool conference. I'm going to be speaking at the student conference the day before, and I'll be hanging out at the conference on Saturday. It's a really good time. I went 2 years ago and had a good time. And it's basically all in the hotel. We hang out at the hotel bar at night, go to the conference in the morning. And it's always cool to go to things like this and meet people that care about this stuff. It's kind of recharges your batteries. And of course, Ron Paul is a big hero of mine, and Dan McAdams. So it's a big deal for me to be invited to speak at the student conference, and I'm gonna, have fun hanging out. I know a lot of people that are going to be going. Some people that I work with at antiwar.com and Libertarian Institute, and it's going to be a good time. So if you can go, the tickets are $85. I think it's totally worth it. The hotel's not too bad either. It's I think you could get a room for $120 a night. So if you can go, put the link in the description and let me know if you're going to go. So that is it. That's everything. You could always support this show by sharing, telling your friends about antiwar.com, like, subscribe, comment, all that stuff helps out. I will be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.